Please welcome Professor Ruth Okediji.
I'm going to let everyone it looks like they've emptied your stack of reports. Are they all done? All right, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you all incredibly so much. I'm deeply grateful on behalf of the Harvard African Law Students Association, our wonderful co-presidents who have just been remarkable. Many of you will not know that we are actually about to begin exams. And the students have been tirelessly working to ensure that we would not have another year without the Africa Development Conference. And I think it speaks to the dedication of our young people, to the desperation, let's see that, the dedication of our young people, to the desperation of our young people to work towards a continent that they can think of as having a hope and a relevance for their future. And I think it also speaks to the depth of the desire that they have to be part of the unfolding story of Africa. I teach law and development and law and technology, especially as relates to Africa, and access to medicines in Africa. And I'm always struck by how easy it is to fall into the trap of thinking of Africa as a hopeless story. That is the narrative, that is the perception, and that, in many ways, is the policy that we see coming out from the major metropoles around the world. And I think, as our amazing guest speaker has so powerfully reminded us, changing that story is our responsibility. Changing that story is a responsibility that we each individually and collectively must take hold of. And I think in so doing, we cannot forget the past. I find that when I was here as a student many, many years ago, I had just come back to the US and I knew nothing about Africa. So to your point about knowing our history, I mean, I knew a little bit. I knew jollof rice. I knew plantain, the important things, right? But actually, it was my father. When I was in the eighth, I can't remember what grade I was in, we were driving back home on an afternoon, and he and my mother were engaged in a pretty tense argument. And all I remember is my father saying, Ruth, tell me about George Washington. And I had just finished an amazing report on President George Washington. And I rattled off for about, 8 or 9 minutes and, talked about Washington's great conquest, talked about the night before the Revolutionary War in Massachusetts. I just talked about all these things. And then my father said, well, tell me about any president. And I think he asked me actually about Awolowo. Tell me about Awolowo. And I said, who? Exactly. And he said, well, why don't you tell me about the story of Ghana's independence? And I said, what? He said, well, tell me about what's happening in South Africa. I said, where's that? And those 3 questions sealed my fate. A year later, we were on a plane going back to Nigeria. And my father's point was, if we don't teach our own history, people can retell that history in very calamitous ways. And so as we think about a future for Africa, not because it's monolithic and not because we're uniform, but because we have a shared past and we have a shared aspiration, there is much work to be done. And it really begins here at Harvard. There is much work to be done here. The number of courses on African history are not what they should be. The number of courses on African politics and the institutions of development for the Africa that we know it to be are not what it should be. The number of questions that are being asked about what is being taught about Africa are not at the level that they should be. So there's a need for us to begin to agitate about how we dismantle the old narratives and how we begin to think pragmatically, policy-wise, and institutionally about what it will take to build the Africa that we know we can have and that we know that the generations ahead of us deserve. And so I want to say thank you for challenging us. Thank you for coming to remind us that the work that needs to be done is all of our work and not just one person's. I have to say something about ChatGPT because it's relevant to what we have heard over the last couple of days. Without the African Youth Report of 2022, much of what we would have been hearing would have been repeated stories that have no data points. The importance of this report and the importance of data gathering is crucial if we have any sincere hope that we will have a different story a decade from now. If you put into ChatGPT, tell me about South Africa, it will tell you stories that are not real and that are not true. But yet, this new platform has come, and I have yet to see robust policy or engagement or discussion about how the stories that affect Africa and that will shape the policies of tomorrow are being fed into these platforms that are going to tell the powers that be not the truth about what we hope for, but the mistruths about what people think Africa should be. So I want to challenge those of you who are policymakers, who are coders, who are software engineers, that the work of retelling the story, of dismantling existing narratives and institutions, that work should have begun a decade or more ago. We are already late. So the urgency that we've heard over these last 2 days is an urgency that is compounded by the acceleration of technologies that will seek to cement these mishistories and make them the stories of tomorrow. Let's make a commitment that that will not be the case. I want to thank so many of you that have traveled long distances, that have taken time to come to Harvard to reflect, to challenge, to critique, to encourage. His Excellency Mamadou Bawumia, the Vice President of the Republic of Ghana, we want to say thank you to Your Excellency. It is always a delight and an honor to see leaders, however we may critique them. It is a delight and an honor to welcome leaders to this campus. I want to thank Mr. Ivor Ichikovitz. Thank you so much for the passion, the integrity, the vision that has driven both your keynote, but also your passion in casting a vision for a new Africa. Dr. Jumoke Oluwole, the special advisor to the President of Nigeria on the ease of doing business. I want to thank Minister Kirsty Coventry Seward, the Minister for Youth, Sports, and Creativity. Dr. Jane Nana Opoku Achemang, my mother who was born in Ghana will be listening and wondering if I'm pronouncing all of this correctly, the former Chancellor of the University of Cape Coast. All of our panelists over the last 2 days who have come, who have spoken, both with passion, but also with intellect. The Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs here at Harvard University for their support and their contributions. Business and Governance PIC, the Center for Africa Studies, all of the co-chairs who are here. Albert Achengpong, where are you? Let's send up. I want to give you a thank you. Chedzia Juru. Kershil Singh, where are you? Michael Asare, where are you? Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. These are our leaders. I cannot tell you what it takes on this campus to negotiate space, to create an agenda, to make it possible to have a robust conversation about Africa. Every step of the way is a challenge. So for these young leaders, I want to say thank you so much. Thank you. And last but not least, I want to thank all of the volunteers. If you are a volunteer for HALA, ADC, would you please stand wherever you are? We want to say thank you. All of our volunteers, please stand. All of you, thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I want to say one final thing before we allow you to go eat. The story of Africa is often told in the past tense. This is who we were. This is what happened to us. This is what was said. This is what was done. The Africa of tomorrow must be a story not only of the past, but of all of the possibilities that the future holds. And as we've heard in the last 2 days, those possibilities are immense and continuing. And so what it means in the great vision of what this continent means to all of us, while the formal proceedings are over, the informal conversations, the informal markets, the informal collaborations must continue, because those informal dynamics, as we know, are really the bedrock of what makes Africa a continent not only of yesterday and today, but a continent of tomorrow. Thank you. Have a great afternoon.